Serious. What have you seen that made you believe in paranormal things? When I was 14, I agreed to look after my neighbor's cats while they were away. They left me a key to their house, and I was supposed to go over once every day to feed the cats and check on them. But when I was walking over the following evening, I saw an older woman in one of the windows of the upper floor, staring at me. I got a little confused and turned, walking back home thinking that maybe I had mistaken the day, or if they got someone else to check on the cats. The next day, same thing happened. I walked over again and I saw the same woman staring at me from a window, but this time on the first floor. I called my neighbor then, and they got worried and told me to call the police because no one was supposed to be in there. I called, the police came, but the house was empty, except for the cats. I stayed in the house while the police left and fed the cats. I left soon after. I came over and fed the cats as I had promised, but the whole thing gave me the creeps. I never saw the woman again. But the cats refused to leave the living room. When I was a kid, like 9 or 10, I had a super creepy dream about a tall man in a black hat. Think Alucard in Van Helsing. The thing that really flirbo with me was how familiar he was, like I had always known him. Whatever, nightmare. Then, a year or two ago, 20 plus years later, I was listening to the Astonishing Legends podcast as I was falling asleep, and they described the Hat Man, their term, a tall creepy figure, with red eyes and a wide-brimmed hat, who has apparently been showing up in people's nightmares for years. I know it's not a sighting, and I'm still not sure I believe in the paranormal, but it freaked me the heck out. Holy butter robot man. I encountered the Hat Man when I was 18 and have been sifting through personal accounts trying to make sense of all this. What you wrote here has thoroughly freaked me out because when I encountered him, I had that exact same feeling familiarity. One night I woke up to a bunch of black figures that I could only make out the silhouettes of. My bed was in the center of my room, and they completely surrounded me. On my left were 3 figures that must had some sort of hood and robes on. I could see no eyes, but they were average height and just standing next to me, watching. To my right, there was only one figure, a silhouette of what appeared to be a young girl. She was wearing some sort of strange skirt. She was leaning over to me and whispering into my ear, in a language that I've never heard. That was when I realized that I was replying to her in that same language. This is the most surreal part of this, I was speaking these strange words willingly, but I wasn't thinking of them. You know how you construct a sentence in your head before you speak it? That wasn't happening. I immediately thought to myself, wait, how long have I been talking to her? And she giggled in this strange manner. It was like her laugh echoed even though it was very quiet. That was when I looked forward and saw that there was another hooded figure standing by the foot of my bed, and just behind her, leaning against the wall, was the Hat Man. He was taller than everyone else and had a pilgrim-like hat and a trenchcoat-type Victorian jacket. I could only see the shape of what he was wearing. He seemed to also be amused, and I immediately realized why I hadn't been panicking. For some reason, I felt calm, harmonious. There was this feeling of familiarity, like I was among old friends. I questioned why that may be, but I couldn't care less at that moment, I was elated. As I continued to unwilling talk to the girl, I could feel that Hat Man was pleased, that the little girl was as well. All of that probably took place within 2 to 5 minutes of time. And then the figures started dissolving into a smoky dark clouds that barely resembled the shape of their bodies. The cloud legitimately floated up out of my room, which now seemed infinitely brighter than what it had looked like just before. As if their presence made my room much darker than it should have been that night. I was never a believer in ghosts until I went to boarding school. One night shortly before 9 p.m., I ran down to the faculty in charge desk to ask if the library was still open because I needed to print something out. Whomever it was said yes, they thought so. I went down towards the library. To get to the library, you had to pass through a set of double doors which were usually open. Once you passed the doors, there was a set of stairs going up to a sun deck and a set going down to what had once been the pool. Beyond the stairs was a brief hallway, then the library. So I walked down towards the library and the double doors were closed. I pulled on one and it still opened, so thinking nothing of it, I continued on to the library. I got to it and it was closed. I turned around and walked back to the double doors and found them locked from the inside, the doors had windows, forgot to say that. I figured sooner or later someone would walk down the hall that led to the doors and I could yell and get their attention. I'm standing there watching the hallway for someone for about 10 minutes when I hear the sound of footsteps coming up from the aforementioned pool area. I turn expecting to see someone who can possibly let me out. Then the footsteps go running past me and I heard, "Let's go play on the sun deck," and I can clearly see no one is there. I started screaming and banging on the doors. Someone finally heard me and let me out. I figured everyone would think I was nuts if I told them, so I just said I was afraid because I was locked in. Later in the school year I found out my school had once been a school for little girls in the late 1800s, and 2 little girls died by falling off the sun deck. I wholeheartedly don't believe in the paranormal. Have lived in remote regions, served in combat, and have lived for a better part camping, hiking, running in the woods to not be spooked or terrified of a lot of the unknowns in this world. Here is where all that changed in a moment. My friend and I were seated in my living room. It was a townhome with only one door and sliding glass patio door for entrances. The sliding glass door was in the living room, and the main door, 15 feet south of the area. We watched some show I cannot recall at pretty low volume, due to us having a roommate asleep that had to work early the next day. And then, I kid you not, clear as fleabing crystal, a girl whispered, "Hey," from behind us. I sat motionless as every fiber of my being was electrified, attempting to register what was happening. After 5 to 10 seconds after I thought I was finally losing it, my roommate says, "Did you fleabing hear that too?" We ran through the house attempting to find the perpetrators. Nothing. No sign of entrance, everything was dead, bolted, bad neighborhood, no other person there. It made no sense. But that "hey" will never leave me. It was a voice. I heard it clear as day, like it was a friend 5 feet away attempting to get your attention. I've had a similar experience to this when I was young. I have only told a few people about this, and as I got older, I've kind of kept it to myself. I haven't talked about it in years. When I too was 9, maybe 10, I got really scared trying to sleep one night. So I ran to my mom's bedroom and told her I couldn't sleep. I stayed with her that night. It must have been a couple hours later, I was awakened by a bright light in her bedroom. My mother did not wake up. I looked over her shoulder and I saw a white figure kind of hovering over her or right next to her. I do not remember seeing wings, but she appeared to be female and looked exactly like my mother, but years younger in appearance. She had her hands folded and she was smiling down at my mother. She then looked at me and smiled at me. I did not get that feeling of calmness. I felt terrified. I remember rubbing my eyes really hard and burying myself under my mom because I was scared. I didn't want to look up again, but I needed to know if this was real or if I was imagining this. I slowly peeked up again, and she was there. I was scared, frozen. I was too afraid to run out of the room, plus I was in the safest spot in the world, by my mom. I stayed real close to my mom and tried waking her up. I whispered, for fear of startling it, to please wake up. Wake up. I said something is here. I didn't know how to explain it. My mom just mumbled and kept sleeping. I then closed my eyes real tight and never opened them again the rest of the night. I eventually fell asleep, and when I woke up in the morning, I avoided looking that direction entirely. I even remember putting my hand over my left side of my face as a shield to avoid looking at that side of the room. I ran out the room and down the hall. It wasn't until around midday, maybe a few hours later, I was brave enough to look back down the hall and into my mother's room again. As I brought up the courage to look back at the room, I saw a somewhat large blob of what seemed like gas. I knew then that I did not dream this. There it was, not as a figure but as a gas-like object. I didn't bring this up to anyone, not even my family, for years. When I was about 15, my brother and I were having a conversation, and we brought up our past. I mentioned this to him for the first time. What shocked me was his response. He saw it too. In high school, I had this sort of weird friend who claimed he regularly communicated with these specific spirits using a Ouija board. He told me their names, birthdays, etc. A couple times when I was at his house, we used the Ouija board to talk to them, and of course they answered, but I figured he was just moving the pointer and didn't think much of it. Then, on Halloween, another friend and I took a Ouija board to a graveyard to use it. We thought we were so cool and edgy. For fun, I tried to communicate with one of my other friend's spirit friends. Well, they answered. Verified their name, birthday. Same as what happened at my friend's house. The friend who usually communicated with them and the friend I was at the graveyard with barely knew each other and had never hung out. I am 100% positive I wasn't controlling the pointer. My old house was built about 90 some odd years ago. All ex-bankers and financial people lived in there, and in all, 5 out of 6 owners had something to do with finance, my father included. My dad and mom would leave for long weekends, and when I was old enough to stay alone, things would go missing, like hammers, game controllers, etc., and I'd find them later under couches and on top of cabinets a few weeks later. It got to the point where I'd pray to Saint Anthony and find my objects in a matter of hours than weeks. Another pretty crazy experience. I lived in the attic. One night, I had a dream I got attacked by a demon, and it slashed me up really good. I woke up with claw marks or something, not actual cuts, but definitely hard scratch marks all up and down my back, and could see 2 red glowing eyes at the end of my room. My room was about 25x8, it really was a huge room. Sobbed myself to sleep that night after the eyes disappeared. My dad the next day asked me if I was up super late because he could hear a lot of movement from upstairs. I am a firm believer in the paranormal after that god-forsaken house. I remember when I was about 9 years old, I went with my aunt to visit my grandparents in Dominican Republic. My mom had to stay in NYC to work because money was kind of short at the time. So anyways, one day, I'm chilling in my grandparents' living room watching Courage the Cowardly Dog in Spanish, so I wasn't really paying attention to it. I look to the left of me past the dining room and see a tall black figure with spikes on the back gliding across the floor slowly into the other hallway at the other half of the house. I was frozen in shock as I couldn't believe what I just saw. I tried to tell myself that it was my grandma, no way in heck looked anything like her, but I went into their room and they were both sleeping. Always was scared as heck of the place ever since and mostly stayed in resorts from there on. I told my friend from DR and he said he has seen a similar thing. He said the locals call it some kind of shapeshifter or something. I also told my cousins recently about it and they've said that they always felt uneasy in that hallway. My sister sees stuff all the time and apparently my cousin and uncle do too. Me, not so much. One time I was at said uncle's house and I felt the hairs on my neck stand up and out of the corner of my eye. I see this pale, white-gowned lady with long black hair slowly walking down the stairs. Inside, I was freaking the flurbo out, but I calmly asked my sister if there was any kind of female spirits around the house. She nonchalantly told me there was a spirit who frequented the place, a woman in a white gown with long black hair, and that our uncle and cousin see her around too. Because the only description I gave to my sister was female spirit, yet she still described the spirit in detail. I believe the only logical explanation for her knowing that information is that the spirit was real. I didn't see the lady spirit again, but there have been a couple times at the same house where I've heard people whispering conversations when there was no one else around me in the middle of the night. I ran to my bed and hid under the covers each time it happened. Another story, by my sister, was when I was home alone doing whatever on my space. My sister and her friend walk through the door and call my little sister's name out. I tell them no one else is home. They then asked, then who was upstairs at the window waving at us?